In the times that we're in, it's easy to get lost in the noise. God knows there's plenty of noise. Even at night, there's noise. But just because there's noise doesn't mean that there's not a signal in the noise. Although it can be difficult to find that signal. And I think that is one of the things that becomes very difficult for a lot of folks, is a lot of folks give up. A lot of folks give up looking for the signal in the noise. And in a time where there's so much fear and paranoia and distrust, one might say that Solzhenitsyn got his way when he said that he wished that we would get but a taste of what they had to endure in Russia during the Soviet years. And quite frankly, I think that he got his wish, because we certainly are having the kind of cognitive impacts and psychosocial cascade effects that are very reminiscent of being in that kind of environment. Particularly the fear, the confusion, the distrust, and a myriad of other things, including moral and ethical degeneration. So we're presented with actually an incredible opportunity, an incredible lesson to learn that could well inoculate us for even worse things that might be coming down the pipeline for everybody else. Now, that's taking the positive side of it, right? But I try to learn something in every situation, regardless of what it is. And I try to glean something of value from it to understand at deeper levels, both vertically, horizontally, and multidimensionally, how these things play out in the micros and the macros. And I know it's crazy. It's a crazy time. Those of you that are struggling with your thoughts or struggling with things that you've never struggled with before, look, you're not alone in that. You're not crazy. Although what is trying to force that on you and make you act out upon it and to be crazy yourselves. But everybody is dealing with cognitive warfare. Everybody's dealing with impacts. Crazy crap being jammed into their heads. Negative and even self-destructive impulses and temptations, and that has an impact on everybody, physiologically and psychologically as well, and sociologically. But we are coming out of it to some degree. But the damages have been done, right? The damage has been done. And so it's going to take a while for people to heal up, and it's also going to, some won't. Some will never come out of it. Some have already succumbed to it and essentially been destroyed by it. But dark times come for every generation in some form or fashion. because you're in a world that has a malicious code at work upon human nature and the frailties of the mortal coils and on your minds that is ever at work attempting to change its predicament. So what is its predicament? Its predicament is that it knows that its time is growing short. Now you may be wondering, what is the it? What is the ambiguous it? It is evil. It is the darkness. It is all that is a lie, all that is corruptive and corrupting in the peoples, tribes, tongues, and nations, because it has already been defeated. It has already been cast out of heaven, and it knows its time is short on earth, because God's will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And that ambiguous it is no longer in heaven, has no access to heaven. But you do. And there within is the battle space, because that is the very thing it wants to keep you from. It is trying to keep you from the truth, because the truth sets you free. It's the truth and the light of the truth that exposes it. That is why it is always working against you and against all the peoples, tribes, tongues, and nations. It is always trying to deceive. It is always trying to ensnare. It is always trying to create fear, confusion, division, conflict, chaos, and destruction, because it feeds on all of those things, and it is dependent upon you. And the big lie is that you are dependent upon what it deceives you with. But you are not. But you have a choice. And that choice is precisely what it wants to prevent you from having. And that is getting free, choosing to seek the truth, choosing to find the way, the narrow way that leads to life eternal and freedom. Freedom from the chains of fear, of confusion, the chains of corruption, the fear of death, the fear of living even, here even, the fear of one another. So what it leverages is what it creates, and that's fear, confusion, corruption. Right? It creates division. It creates conflict. It creates chaos and destruction, because it is at war against the truth, and it cannot stand up to the light of the truth. So it is always attempting to find proxies, people it can enslave and use as shields to wage war against the truth, and turn those proxies into shields, human shields, by which the human shields take the fall, take the hit for what it is doing to them by deceiving them into an enslavement to lies. Now think about what I'm saying to you and think about what that means. Think about what that means in your individual life, in the lives of those that you know, your loved ones, your friends, right? Your co-workers, the people around you every day. It comes to kill, steal, and destroy. It comes to deceive, to tempt, to ensnare, to enslave, devour, and destroy. It is your enemy. It has always been the enemy of all of humanity, and it has always been the enemy to the kingdom of heaven. It has been defeated, and it is being defeated even now. Because everything it does ultimately turns against it. It exposes it. Now think about what I said. The it is evil. Now, I've talked about this in great length for a number of years in all kinds of ways. But think about the reality of what I'm saying. When something ensnares you, think about the fact that it wants to make you dependent upon it. It wants to enslave you and make you dependent upon it. Now think about all the myriad of ways that plays out, and the micros and the macros. Think about addictions. Right? Think about the cycles you go through in your life where you do the same thing over and over again, and you hate it, but you still do it. And then you're so angry with yourself, or you blame others because you can't handle any more guilt, any more shame. You hate how it makes you feel. Well, that is what it does. It makes you feel worthless when it, in fact, is the worthlessness. It enslaves you. It makes you dependent. And then it plays games with your mind, impacts your body, it feeds you lies, and then it leads you steadily towards your own destruction, using you to wreak destruction on others. Think about how that created dependence operates with governments. Think about tyranny, those that want to take away freedom, those that want to distort freedom, that want to distort truth, right? So think about what that looks like in the context of how people are ensnared, enslaved to all kinds of things, including tyrannical regimes. Think about the fear of that between nation states and how that's then played and used to create more conflict, confusion, chaos. It's all based in fear. And because everybody has something, some area of their life that they're ashamed of or they struggle with, it leverages those things in the flesh, in the mind, and then does the same thing with nation states. It creates the conditions for more vulnerability and then exploits what it creates. It manufactures a parallel reality that's not a reality. It's the shadow of a real thing. And then it tries to convince people, places, and things, right? Peoples, tribes, tongues, and nations, that the parallel counterfeit, the shadow of the real thing, is the real thing. That's a spiritual and psychosocial and even political counterfeit, a shadow of the real. So I want you to think about what's playing out in the world around you right now. Between peoples, between tribes, between nations. And within nations. What do you see happening? Is it not these things that I'm talking about right now? Are you not seeing that what was has been counterfeited? A facsimile has been being constructed, even as it is deconstructing the perception and the appearances externally of the real things. That's what I mean by parallelism. It's a form of parallelism. It creates a parallel of the real thing, even as it's destroying the real thing, casting dispersions upon the real thing, covering up the real thing, and then constantly offering counterfeits of the real thing, calling the real thing a facsimile, and calling itself, being a facsimile, the real thing. It's an inversion of reality. And it counts on people only observing things by the external appearances. Be it individuals, be it groups, be it nation states. Your enemy is cunning, clever. It wouldn't be deceptive if it couldn't deceive you. And when one is deceived, the greatest part of being deceived is not realizing that you're deceived. That is the nature of a deception. It blinds you to your predicament, and it blinds you to your ultimate fate, being chained to it. Hence why we talk about Satan, or the word Satan means adversary. Your adversary comes to kill, steal, and destroy. And that can play out in innumerable ways. The most obvious of those, at the macros, is war. That's why we were told that there would be wars and rumors of wars right up to the end of the age, to the very end. Because it exploits the vulnerability of our mortality, our mortal coils. And it does that at scale with nation states. It poisons, it pollutes, think about that from an addiction standpoint. Think about the fentanyl, carfentanil, right? Trank, all the stuff that's flooding our streets. Think about the impacts on people. Think about addiction, because addiction is a very obvious example of what I'm talking about in individuals. But it's not any different between nation states. So think about what has happened in the geopolitical space. Everybody's dependent on different nations for different things. It's one thing if they work together on things. It's another thing if that dependency, right, is forced and weaponized. Now, who's done that as of late, particularly in the last few years? And think about what happens in nation states when the government or segments of a government or even organizations want to make you dependent in a way that is highly destructive to you, and they use destructive and deceptive means and methods to achieve that goal. I'm giving you examples of what the it does. It being the enemy of your soul and the corrupter of all people, places, and things. The corrupter, the deceiver, the destroyer of peoples, tribes, tongues, and nations. And I'm laying groundwork for you to view things differently. And whenever you see a shadow, your own or the shadow of anything else, I want you to think about this talk. I want you to think about what I mean by counterfeits being created in parallel to the real thing. You see, a shadow is the counterfeit or the parallel. It's a parallelism, if you will, of the real object, of the real thing that is, its shadow is being cast on the ground from. It's not the real object. It's the shadow of it. And what it does, it is always pointing away from the light source. So right now I'm looking at a chair under a street light. The street light is on the right, the chair's in the middle, and then laying on the ground, moving away from the street light, is the shadow of the chair. You'll never see a shadow pointing towards the light. You see, that's a great example for what I'm talking about. The shadow is the it. If you were to go to buy a chair like this, and you bought the shadow of it, you'd be considered a fool, would you not? Yet this world is called the valley of the shadow of death for a reason. The shadow is not real, meaning that it's real in a sense that you can see it, but it doesn't have real substance. It only exists because of the thing that the light is casting the shadow on the ground through. Meaning that the shadow of the chair can't exist without the chair. And it can't be perceived without the light. You wouldn't see the light, or you wouldn't see the chair if it wasn't for the light, and you wouldn't see the shadow of the chair if it wasn't for the light and the chair. Now consider why I'm telling you that. The light, in this case the street lamp, right, is an example, a metaphor for the light of the truth. The chair is you. The shadow is the lie, is your enemy. And if your back is to the light and all you see is the shadow, and all the shadow has done is blinded you, darkened your mind, and deceived you into thinking that it is real and everything else is not, and that it is the truth, and the light that you have your back to is a lie. That's a deception. When in fact, that shadow is dependent on both the light of the truth and you. So chew on that a little bit and think about how that plays out in your own life. People that are following their shadows and living in the shadows, in the darkness, and the kind of lives they live, and how they have become proxies, and what their evils do to others, including you. And then I want you to think about the fact that there are areas of your own lives that you have done the same thing or are continuing to do so. And there are areas that you don't know that you're still doing it. But that becomes very difficult in dark times. So why would we use that terminology? Why would it be a dark time? What do you think makes the times dark? Well, a critical mass of people are chasing their shadow with their back to the light. They've turned away from the light of the truth. They've been deceived, been poisoned, been enslaved to lies, to fear, to confusion, and all that comes with it. They've been tempted, ensnared, enslaved, and they're being led deeper and deeper towards what? More fear, more confusion, a stronger deception, which we could use the term delusion, and there's more what? Division, conflict, chaos. Things are breaking down faster. Things don't work right. Everything's kind of off. That increases. Well, when that reaches a critical mass as well, the chaos gives way to destruction. Now think about that, and think about all of human history. And think about your own history, meaning your own personal life, and the lives of others that you know, and the things that you are seeing in your society, and in the rest of the peoples, tribes, tongues, and nations. And consider why it is, I always say, as it is for people, so too it is for the nation and the nations.